What's the most wholesome experience you've had with a stranger? I was in the hospital, knowing I'd be there for at least a week, and possibly more. I was sick of hospital food, so I went downstairs to go across the street to the hospital subway. I was pretty far back in the hospital, 6th floor, backside of the building, labyrinth of staircases and hallways to get out the front door. The walk from there to subway took almost 15 minutes, even though it was just across the street. I waited in line, got up to the counter to order, and realized I left my wallet in my room. I ordinarily keep my wallet in my back pocket, but there was no need to in the hospital since I was in my room most of the time. I was exhausted mentally by that point from the stay, told them I'd forgotten the wallet, and turned to make the trek all the way there and back again. All of a sudden, a nurse behind me bought my food for me, saving me the trip and the money. I thanked him profusely. That was years ago, but I will never forget that act of kindness. I was traveling from the south of England to the north of Scotland to start a new job the next morning. I had taken a train up to London and was supposed to get on an early morning flight from Heathrow. The bus to the airport, however, was cancelled and I had to make my own way using a series of night buses. However, it was about 2:30 AM. and my phone was dead, and I had never used London's night buses before. I was young and a little scared, standing in the middle of Victoria trying to figure out the faded bus schedule when a woman came up to me and asked, "Are you alright, love?" And I explained through tears that I thought I was going to miss my flight and didn't even have an Oyster card. She looked up my route on her phone, wrote down all the possible variations of buses and trains that I would need to take, including the times. She waited with me the entire time, like 20 minutes. Then when the bus came up, she paid for my fare. No cash on London buses. I got out and looked at her and she shrugged and said, "Oh, I'm not getting the bus. You just looked like you needed someone." I think about her every once in a while, and I'm incredibly grateful for her. I was in an abusive relationship and it ended with him beating me up very badly. Broken ribs, bruises and cuts all over me. He was arrested, but the process and aftermath was heck. It was spring and the weather was warming, but for weeks I wore long sleeves and high collars to hide the cuts and bruises. Eventually everything healed and faded except one very deep bruise on my upper arm. I had had enough of hiding them in shame, so one day I said frick it and wore short sleeves. I was standing in line in Wal-Mart and noticed this rough biker looking dude staring at me. I thought he was checking me out or whatever. Then he asked me how I got that bruise on my arm. I stumbled answering and he outright asked, "Did somebody hurt you?" For some reason I decided to be honest and not lie in shame, so I said out loud, "Yes, somebody hurt me." He looked at me and in the kindest voice said, "You did not deserve that. Whoever it was will get what's due to them one day." For some reason, that was a turning point for me. I knew then that I was going to be okay. I knew that no matter how things turned out legally, that I was going to be okay. I never saw that man again, but I honestly think he was an angel sent to give me a message. My car declined at a fast food place a couple years ago. The manager saw it happening and came up and gave me the food anyway. It may have come from a frick this establishment mood rather than the unrelenting kindness of his heart, but either way it really made my day. Once went out to a restaurant for a meal. Earlier the same day we found out that one of my partner's relatives, someone they were close to, had killed themselves. We thought it would be a good idea to get out of the house and distract ourselves. Our waitress was lovely and spoke to us throughout the meal as it was quiet and she seemed fun. At the end of the meal, and many wines, my partner was visibly emotional. Not crazy, just sad looking. The waitress asked us if we were okay and saw that my partner was upset, so she asked again. We told her what had happened. She was shocked and it was obvious she really felt for my partner. A few minutes later, she came over with some limoncello shots and said it's on the house, which was unexpected and lovely. We protested a bit, but she said, "I'm managing the night. It's little things like this that make me like working here, because I can make your night a bit better." What a legend. It gets even more lovely though. We asked her for the bill shortly after, and when it arrived, it read £0. She had discounted the whole bill, putting it through as wastage. We were shocked and had a tearful goodbye with her after many protests and finding it unbelievable. We'd had a 3-course meal, wine and beer, loads of sides. We went to town and she just covered it because my partner was sad. I'll remember it forever. She could have kept herself to herself and ignored us, but that moment of kindness meant too much to us that day and turned it from a crappy day to a less crappy day. I once took my son to a local science center for a day of fun. I also have cerebral palsy. I get around well enough. Sometimes I use a wooden cane, but I'm alright and supported. I rock a mean limp and have terrible balance, but if you were to see me walking around, most would just assume I had been injured at some point. While walking around, I spotted this woman with a young daughter of maybe 7-8 using a walker and sporting a pair of leg braces. The mother and I locked eyes a few times throughout our free roaming day until eventually our kids started interacting with the same exhibit. We were standing there watching them and I turned to the mother, and before I could even speak she said, "Cerebral palsy, you too." Huh. We ended up spending the rest of our day together chatting about our lives and experiences and going over the many advancements and therapies that have been developed since my childhood. She ended up telling me at the end of the day that seeing me being a single dad to my son and being so independent in spite of my disability gave her a lot of peace of mind. She said she worried a lot about what her daughter's future might hold in terms of her independence. It was just an all-around really nice experience. I had a knock on my door, and when I opened it, there was a stranger with a gift card to a local garden store for me. Apparently her kid had been pinching tulips from my garden every day to give to his mom, and they wanted to pay for them once they figured out whose garden they were coming from. I had thought squirrels were doing it and had regretted planting them the year before, not being able to enjoy them. I spent the gift card on more bulbs. I moved 1,000 miles away from everything I knew after graduating college 16 years ago. Back then I was pretty homesick, struggling in my career and figuring things out, so I felt pretty lost in life. One day I was walking around downtown Orlando when an older man, probably in his mid-80s, stopped me. He handed a piece of paper that he was carrying to me and said, "You seem like a good person with a good heart. It will be alright." Then he just walked away. Looking down, that piece of paper was a copy of a handwritten page by him filled with dozens and dozens of sayings, illustrations and quotes from all over the world regarding love and hope. Tears came immediately and I put it away to read later that day. It stayed on my wall in my home for the better part of 10 years until I moved again. Now it's been 16 years since then, and sure, he's moved on to the next world by now. I still have that page. Take it out occasionally and think about that wonderful man from many years ago who taught me about pure and genuine random acts of kindness right along with love and hope. He was an absolute blessing to me and to our world. Thank you, good sir. You were a beautiful soul. My uncle used to do that, except in Mexico. He was elderly and the only job he could get in his old age was as a cart wrangler for grocery stores. He would take whatever tips he'd receive and use it to make little half sheets of encouragement and well-wishing and hand them out at random. He passed 2 years ago. I miss him every day. I was in London and was supposed to be flying home that day. Walking down the street with my 2 suitcases towards the tube station nice and early on my way to Heathrow with plenty of time. Silly me didn't realize that when the sign said there is going to be a tube strike on the day you fly home, that means the tube is completely closed. I thought it just meant delays or something. I don't know. I start walking toward the bus station a few blocks away, desperately trying to come up with a plan B. A young man comes up to me and offers to help carry my suitcases. He asks where I'm going, and I say Heathrow, which is an hour away at this point in time until my flight is running short. It starts raining. He says you'll never make it there on time on the buses. He calls me a cab, then finds a little awning where we can sit and wait for the cab and stay out of the rain. He lets me use his phone to transfer money to pay for the cab. Mine didn't have service outside my home country. We just sat and chatted for 30 minutes waiting for this cab, and he made me feel so much less panicked. I just couldn't believe the kindness he showed to some random person on the street, and I've never been able to find him again online to thank him. This happened when I was around 9 or 10. I was out riding my bike with my mum, and halfway through the trail, my bike breaks down anyway. We couldn't carry the bike back home since it would take hours, so we were just stranded in that field. There were a few people on the trail who saw our inconvenience, but either they didn't have any bike knowledge to know how to fix it, or they couldn't be bothered to care. At least an hour had passed before this old man, and I mean like real old, he looked to be around 80, approached us and fixed our bike free of charge. He got his hands down to the grease, and eventually after a few minutes I could start pedaling again. I thought that was a really wholesome moment, his kindness and coolness to our situation, and that's why this memory sticks to me, I guess. Old bike dudes are insane. They're always the friendliest and also the most hardcore in any club because while everyone else is at work they're going out with a group of retirees and doing 40-80 miles a day, 5-6 days a week, and they know their crap for self-repair from being bike dudes for donkey's years. I was using crutches at the time after an ankle injury, got off the tram to go to uni and hobbled straight into a surprise Melbourne spring storm. Guy with very limited English walked me from the tram stop to my class, holding an umbrella over me the entire walk, about 10 minutes. One of those lovely, warm fuzzy memories. When I was 16, I'd taken my mom's old Pontiac Bonneville to the movies and I was in such a hurry that I forgot to turn off the lights. When I came out, the car was dead but someone left a set of jumper cables on the hood with a note that said, "I hope you make it home safely." I've never ever forgotten about that. Since then I've tried to pay that kindness forward any way I can. This is a lovely story but holy crap, as soon as I saw jumper cables I was expecting the next line to be and then my dad beat me with them. Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon just came out in theaters. I had been planning to go see it on my next day off. I didn't have a car so relied on the bus. The day of the movie came and there was a snowstorm. I walked downtown to get the bus but there was a sign saying all buses cancelled due to snow. I was super bummed out and walked over to the local coffee shop. I ordered a coffee and was telling the owner how disappointed I was that I couldn't get to the movies. There was an older woman sitting in the shop and she overheard us. She looked at me and said, "I really want to see that movie too. Let's go, I'll drive." So that the day me and a perfect stranger went out to lunch and to see a movie together. About a year later I started seeing this guy in town and his downstairs neighbor was the lady who took me to the movies all those months earlier. We had stopped by her house for her to get a sweater before the movies. I told the guy me and your neighbor went to see Crouching Tiger together. He was like, "That was you?" She went on and on about how cool it was to go to the movies. Marry him, ask her to officiate the ceremony, and then sell those rights to Hallmark. Henny. Seriously, though, I love this story. Thanks for sharing it. When I was 18 I had a friend in the hospital with brain cancer. His time was limited. I visited him when I could. He was kind of hippie alternative punk. I wore a leather jacket and had long hair. I walked to his room. A nurse saw me. Without saying a word she walked to me and gave me a long comforting hug. That's how I knew he passed. That's a very sweet and gentle way of telling someone about another person's passing. I was really drunk and started puking in the trash can in the women's bathroom since there was a line to get to a toilet. One of the girls in line held my hair up and rubbed my back, telling me I'd be okay. I drunkenly told her I loved her. I may also have been crying. Wherever you are, bathroom girl, I still love you. Bathrooms are the place we take care of each other always, lol. I have been diagnosed with PTSD, depression, and anxiety and I was at the pharmacy trying to get my meds filled but my card kept declining. A couple of the meds have major side effects if I skip a dose so I really couldn't go without them. I was frantic and trying to figure out what was wrong with my card when another lady smiled and swiped her card for me so I could get my medication refilled. I was in Edinburgh, traveling alone. I met some guys at the hostel and we went to a club, but it was weird. So I came back to the hostel. The hostel is on the Royal Mile. It's 2 AM and there is a girl doing poi juggling. I did some poi juggling myself, so I stopped to watch, and when she stopped, started talking to her. I asked her where she was from. She said Brazil. So, being a stereotype guy like I was, I asked her whether she knew Capoeira. She did. So, on Friday night, on the Royal Mile, me and a stranger did Capoeira. It was more than 20 years ago, and I still remember it. It was awesome. I lived in Edinburgh for 5 years and can 100% imagine this happening. Thank you for the trip down memory lane. Driving on the highway, the car in front of me suddenly swerved to take an exit, and then tried to swerve back onto the highway, almost sideswiping me in the process. Luckily there was no one to my left, so I veered into the left lane and avoided an accident. A few moments later I'm passing her, and she very sheepishly looks up at me, kind of anticipating and expecting someone to cuss her out. Well, I had just learned a new road trip trick. Flipping people off is stupid, but giving them a thumbs down really stays with someone. It's the I'm not mad, I'm disappointed of the road. I had a huge bus thumbs down queued up for this driver, but when I saw her face I immediately knew she didn't mean to. She was embarrassed, and she already felt bad enough. So instead I flashed her a huge smile, dramatically and jokingly wiped sweat from my brow, and gave her a giant thumbs up. She smiled and laughed, and honestly it's one of my favorite moments in my life. I'm getting tearful at nearly all of these comments, but imagining you react like that when she was expecting the worst just made me laugh. I'm sure she will always remember it too. Glad everyone was okay. I was going to a Starbucks to eat with a friend I met days ago. Suddenly a stranger about my age asked me how to go to that exact same place, so I told him that I was going there too, and we started a conversation while walking. When we got to the Starbucks, we sat at different tables and I waited for my friend. He didn't appear, because he had some problems and finally he couldn't go. I asked the stanger if I could eat with him and he accepted. Now we are friends and we sometimes talk through our mobiles. Capoeira friend. I wonder why you couldn't find him. I had just lost my job and my dad had his card stolen. He was waiting on the bank but completely out of food and living in an old, run-down RV. I would have figured something out. I'd die before I let him starve. Right as he's almost in tears talking to me about it, someone knocked on the door. A lady had food for someone in an RV, but those people had vacated the parking lot and she wanted to know if my dad needed some sort of local helping hands org. There was everything from canned goods to fresh meat, milk, pasta, everything. She had bought it with her own money and didn't want it to go to waste. I'll never forget the timing or her generosity. A little bit. I believe that she knew your dad was in need and was generous enough to offer this assistance in a way that seemed like happenstance rather than someone observing them struggling. Pride can be a bee, and it's a delight to see when people go out of their way and get creative about generosity. I'm a wheelchair user. At a baseball game, a little girl came running up to me and climbed onto my lap. Her mom was apologetic, but I told her it was fine. No worries. Looking at the girl's face, I could tell she had some kind of developmental disability. Mom explained to me that the little girl's grandfather used a wheelchair and she missed him. I rolled around a little to give her a ride. She giggled and had a good time. Then she climbed off and went back to her mom. Seems to me like her mom would also describe this as the most wholesome experience she's had with a stranger. 3. I was once traveling through an old town when I stopped at a small shop to buy some packaged water. I was in my tweens at that time, so I jumped out of my car and went to buy. A very old man sat at the shop. Once I bought everything, he took out an ice cream and handed it to me. As I was about to take the bottles with me, he picked the bottles himself and walked with me to the car so that I could have my ice cream. He was very old and scaly, very thin too. And once he saw that I had a younger sister, he rushed back to the shop to bring out another ice cream for her. I insisted that he take money for it, but he didn't take it and just smiled. Maybe we reminded him of his grandchildren, I presume. Or he didn't have grandchildren and was just doing it out of sheer kindness. Love this story. Went to a bar to meet a date and got ghosted. So I'm sitting at the bar drinking alone and saw a woman being harassed by a drunk guy. I intervened and she acted as if she'd been waiting for me. The drunk got lost in the woman and I sat together at the bar for a couple hours. We had a really great time. Lots of smiles and laughs. There were sparks for sure. She asked for my phone and started talking selfies, so I took it back from her to get some better photos. Probably captured 50 or so, some really candid ones and some silly poses. After we laughed about the photos, she got up to leave. I asked for her number and if we could go out sometime, but she declined. She thanked me for the wonderful night and said something along the lines of let's just leave it at this and enjoy the memory. Somehow I felt okay with that. I kept her photos for several years and every time I saw them they instantly brought a smile to my face. I never even knew her name, but it was one of the best dates of my life. As a woman who has been on both sides of the situation many times, the girl who would appreciate intervention as well as acting as a spontaneous date or friend for others, I find these to be the best brief interactions I've ever experienced. They are part of why I still go to my local bar despite not being able to drink anymore. On my honeymoon in Greece, we nearly got stranded driving our little scooter back from a day trip. Finally found a petrol station in this village, but it was during afternoon nap siesta time. We apologized as best we could in the little Greek we knew. The guy obliged but looked a little annoyed. He casually asks where we are from and we tell him New Zealand. His face lights up and is amazed because he had never met someone from NZ before. He asks us what are we doing so far away from home. We tell him that it's our honeymoon. He tells us to wait there and comes back with a bottle of wine that's obviously worth more than the €6 of petrol we are buying. He refuses for us to round up the bill or for us to buy anything. He just tells us honeymoon is honeymoon, be happy, go. Hands down one of the best highlights of our trip. I've never met more hospitable people than in Greece. I'd ask for directions, and people would invite me to their home and give me wine and olives while they were calling their English speaking friend over from 2 villages down the road. Amazing people. I guess this can be perceived as pathetic by some people and that's okay, but I used to go to school with a bunch of horrible people. I'm disabled so I look and walk weird. Every time I'd go out for lunch to my favorite food place and see them, they'd hurl insults. Anyway, I was standing in a long queue and they were behind me. There was an old lady, maybe like 70-80 behind them. They were making fun of my walk. I sorta can't walk straight BC I had a stroke as a kid. And this old lady called them a bunch of cruel twats. It was really kind of her to stand up to them. I always will remember that. I started going back to the gym. First day saw a personal trainer and took some pre-workout. I was pushed pretty hard and by the time I left, I was dizzy, lightheaded and nauseous. On my drive home my symptoms got worse and progressed to the point where my arms and legs went tingly to numb, lost fine motor control, hyperventilating and my speech became nearly unintelligible. My hands locked up and I couldn't open them or move my fingers. I was essentially temporarily handicapped but I was still thinking straight. I pulled over, hazards on, crawled out and onto the curb, fumbling about dialing 911. The operator couldn't understand me and I didn't know what was happening to me and was panicking. A woman pulled up behind me, got out and asked what was happening, if I was okay. I shook my head and handed her the phone that says 911 on the screen. I did my best to tell her what was wrong but she could also see the state I was in. She told the operator what she saw, where we were. She got me a blanket from her car and wrapped it around me and stayed with me until help arrived. I looked up at her and managed to say the most defeated, desperate thank you I could muster before she left. I recovered shortly after and didn't need to go to the hospital, but was still picked up by family. Bless that woman, wherever she is. The most wholesome and memorable experience was in a crowded New York airport with an elderly lady. I saw her crying and looking bewildered as she sat alone in the main concourse. So I sat down next to her and asked if I could help. She said she was going to a family member's funeral on the West Coast and had never been in an airport. The lady was hard of hearing and the loudspeaker announcements just compounded her confusion, to the point where she was physically trembling. At that point, as I once noted here in Ask Reddit, I guided her through security and directly to her gate, asking the attendants to give her special assistance, especially with her inability to discern broadcast announcements. As an attendant escorted her for boarding, the lady turned, waved, and blew a kiss in my direction. To this day, I can still picture her vividly. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.